I feel like asexuality's been in a Groundhog Day for a long time. Like, I could literally find like black and white articles from like the 1960s and 70s that say, look at this new orientation, meet the asexuals never before seen. And then you'll see that again in the 80s, and then you'll see it in the 90s. And then there's like things from the 2000s where they're asking asexual people the same questions I get of, what is this new orientation? And now it's Gen Z are identifying as it. Before it was the millennials. And it's like, it literally just goes in a cycle of it being reintroduced as a new thing every few years.
Life today is chaotic, unpredictable, and constantly shifting. But within the chaos lies opportunity, and we're here to seize it. This is Generation Uncharted.
Yasmin Benoit, thank you so much for joining me. I am so honored to have you on the podcast. Now, you are a model and activist, and you have really forced the world to pay attention to asexuality and to, I think, maybe contemplate what that even means for the first time. So my very first question for you is, in 2025, do you feel like the conversation around asexuality has changed since you started doing this?
I like to think so. I feel like it hasn't changed as much as it could have done. I think if I kind of compare it to other communities and like conversations that have changed a lot since like 2019, I feel like I always kind of end up comparing things to like the trans community just because like the numbers are statistically similar. And I feel like that's kind of become like a very big conversation over the past few years, whereas asexuality, I feel like is kind of been teetering in a bit of a Groundhog Day. But I do think that it is on more people's radars and it's becoming more of an international conversation. And also, we're kind of getting beyond the 101 and into like legislation a bit more. So I think that's improved.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously you do so much on asexuality, and I do quite a bit on bisexuality. And that comparison to the trans community is always so interesting because you're right. There was a huge focus on trans for many years, which I guess in some ways was good, but also in some ways very bad. Because, look at the way the legislation has gone kind of backwards in the UK and in the US. Actually being able to sort of slide under the radar a little bit sometimes has its yin and its yang, right? Because sometimes you do get annoyed, like, come on, why are we not talking about this? But at the same time, it's like actually not having that kind of heat can also work to your advantage sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's very dependent on, I guess, what the political climate is, because I feel like asexuality was like sliding under the radar from like Tony Blair onwards. And I feel like it probably could have done with a little bit when we were kind of in a more liberal time. I think that would have fared pretty well for us. Now that we're in a more conservative era, I think it's maybe a bit beneficial that there isn't so much heat on us, but I also feel like the heat is becoming directed towards everybody. I don't think that there's any like safe groups right now. And that's why with my work, I've always kind of like observed like the trans community, for example, and kind of been like, okay, well, we're all aiming for awareness, but what happens after the awareness when everybody knows about you? That could easily backfire. So that's why I've always been like, okay, well, once we've kind of got that, we should also look at like provisions as well, because it doesn't always go well.
This is the thing, right? Is that when you're fighting for equality, or at least trying to do your bit, fighting for equality is like an art form, and changing hearts and minds, if you do it incorrectly or you misjudge the sentiment of a nation, you can really mess it up. So it's a difficult thing to do. I think people just think it's about coming up with social media posts, and it's really not. So tell me, because I always find it so interesting talking about bisexuality to Earl, I'm blue in the face for almost 10 years. What do you still find that people find surprising about asexuality, where you're kind of like, what? But that, how have you still not got that? That's all I've been talking about all these years.
I think it's surprising. I think one, people don't realize like how many asexual people there are. I think people think it's more rare than it is. Like, I think when you kind of hear like, oh, it's like 1 to 2% of the population, they're like, oh, so that's like nothing. I'm like, trans community is like 1 to 2% of the population. Redheaded people is like 1 to 2% of the population. And it's not that crazy to see someone with like ginger hair. So, I think people assume that it's less relevant to their lives and that they don't know anybody or that they won't meet anybody like that. I also think that a lot of people still confuse asexuality with having like no libido whatsoever. I think that that is another common misconception that it just means have like having no sexual capacity like whatsoever, and thus that it is something that can be fixed through like libido increasing medication and stuff. And then I guess also just that asexual discrimination is the thing. I don't think people really think about it, even though it's like people kind of discriminate against most non-straight communities, so it shouldn't be that wild that asexuality gets it too, but I think people don't really think about it.
And thinking about not so much the national or international stage now, but just, in bars and clubs and friendships and families where there are asexual people, what do you wish that people understood if they only could see the next 1 minute of clip of whatever you're about to say? When it comes to, the pressure on dating or why don't you like it? Like, what do you wish that you could say you could just let them know?
I guess probably just that asexuality, like, is just a sexual orientation. I think for asexuality in particular, take it as being something that's caused by something else. So they kind of conflate it with your lifestyle or with your relationships or with your capacity for types of relationships or your understanding of sex or about your experiences or your traumas or your personality or your approaches to anything. Whereas I think, if someone said they're gay, they wouldn't be like, oh, so that must mean that you don't wear this and you don't like this and you think this about this and all these things. But for asexuality, people will conflate it with your personality, your physical health, your mental health, all these things. So I think I wish people would just take it as an orientation and not like a value judgment and not as like a personality trait.
Yeah. Right. Let's get into the big stuff now. So it can be very hard to be the face. Not that either of us are saying we're the face of asexuality, but I certainly, when I first started out and I was getting a lot of press and it was all me and I was half naked and bisexuality was written across
Me
my
too.
face. Yes. We have a lot of similarities, to be honest. There was certainly, from my side, a bit of a backlash from, you sort of think you're going to get hate from the straight community, but actually there's the backlash that comes from within the LGBT community anyway, of like, who the hell are you? And I've had gay men say, shut up, bisexuality is not important, we've got bigger problems like X and Y. But also bisexuality, as I'm sure asexuality is such a widespread sexuality where you've got people that are bisexual virgins, you've got people that, cannot be in a monogamous relationship, you've got people that are only in a that there's always going to be, well, why are you always in the paper talking about your version of this when I don't think that you're right and I have disability? And this idea of almost tearing people down rather than saying, oh, it's great we're getting the representation and I could contribute because I see it a little bit differently. What has your interaction been like with the asexual community?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had both sides of it. I think that I guess for me, I guess I kind of came out of nowhere, I think, from the asexual community's perspective, because I wasn't really involved in the asexual community prior to my activism because I wasn't sure how much I would fit in there. I was literally only seeing like white teenagers. So I was like, I don't think this is my space. So I guess a lot of people were kind of like, where does she come from and why is she the one doing all the things? I mean, I often get people like, I mean, I got comments today, I get comments last week of people being like, I don't relate to her. She doesn't look like me. I don't get it. I don't feel represented by that. I don't think that's good representation. But then I've also kind of had a lot of people who I think were kind of hoping that the image of asexuality would diversify a bit and not just be so Sheldon Cooper-esque. And they were kind of very happy to see someone like me doing what I'm doing. I like to think that that is the majority, but there's definitely like as always, I think negative people tend to be kind of loud. So yeah, I definitely do get like the people that they don't like the way I dress, they don't like the way I look, or they feel kind of threatened by this like random black girl who's occasionally in lingerie being associated with their sexuality when they're like, I don't relate. But I'm also like, okay, well, get up and do it better. We'll see what happens.
That's certainly always been my challenge is like, well, why can't we both exist? Why you do your thing, I'll do mine. But one thing that I have found with that particular issue, it's never been so much that I am that bothered by it. And of course, there's been times over the years where I have been bothered by it. But certainly at this point, I really couldn't care less what people comment on I think it's a very odd thing to see an article and take time out of your day to write a comment to say how much you hate this article and what you'd like to do if you could get your
Yeah,
hands
I've
on it.
never
It's
had
like,
the instinct myself personally.
what an odd thing to, I've never been inclined to do that. But what I think for me, it's always been the issue is you're scaring off other people that might want to put themselves out there. And that's really hard because then you only get a certain kind of people doing this, which are people that are hardened to that comments and things. But I just think sometimes, I know you think you're taking a shot at me, but what you're actually doing is shooting at all these other up and coming bisexuals that want to say something and now are like, oh my God, I don't want to risk that happening to me. And I just think that's quite a sad thing that people don't always realize.
Yeah, I think especially, from like a intersectional perspective, like there are the asexual community is predominantly white, like white people are more likely to identify as asexual, maybe because they're just more in the position to do that. And so I think that when, black asexuals are usually pretty happy with me and like seeing me, and I feel like are also quite affected when they then see white asexual people that are happy with every other white activist but me, because it feels very pointed, because it's like, why me in particular? Like everybody else gets a pass for doing whatever, and you just don't like me for some reason. And I think it kind of adds to that feeling of unease, which I also think that like most parts of the queer community aren't ready to really address intersectionality like that. Like I think when it comes to things like race and stuff, people don't really want to go there and like unpack their biases. It makes people very uncomfortable. So it's awkward because it's like
It's
you can kind of
interesting.
tell it's an issue, but no one wants to go there.
Well, I was just about to say that. There's definitely been times over the years where I've suspected, is this a race thing? Surely not. But it's also under the radar. They're not going to actually say, I hate you because of this, or I've got an issue because of that. I mean, some people will, of course. Sometimes a lot of people, it's so under the radar, you can't really ever call it out.
And then if you say it, then you just have like a chip on your shoulder because you brought it up.
Yeah.
Even though it's like, well, it felt obvious to me, but I was just.
Exactly. Right, let's get back to media though, because everything in the media at the moment that I keep seeing is about grey sexual, which I believe
That
is
was like
sort of,
this week, like last week or this week. It's weird.
yeah, it's become a big thing. So what's your perspective on grey sexual?
I mean, it's not new. It's been part, like, I've spoken about it. It's part of the asexual community, has been for many a decade. It's just, I feel like I assume that the reason people started mentioning it, I'm connecting it to Talisa from, and I still call her Talisa from End Ups. I know she's done other things, but that's my association. Mentioned demisexuality on I'm a Celebrity and released a book recently. That's the only connection I can put to why the media is talking about it, because they've got both of our pictures next to each other in the articles. So that's kind of like what I'm assuming things are talking about it now. I've also noticed that in those articles, they keep putting my picture in it and like never quoting me, not once, which really annoys me.
Oh, wow.
Places do that because they want like the clicks of like putting me in the thing, and then they just like quote every, like, again, every white asexual person and like never me. And I'm like, so what am I doing in the picture?
It's interesting, isn't it? So do you feel that sometimes the media needs sort of the new title or the new thing? Because actually sometimes, and I get this sometimes where I've had actual people in the media say, oh, bisexual, no one identifies as that anymore. We want to talk about people being fluid and all this kind of, it's like they always seem to need to make it new, which is, it can be irritating a lot. And I've thought a lot about even the word bisexual actually sort of harming the bisexual cause. I've sort of landed on, I don't care, I'll go down with the bisexual ship. But for example, we have a lot of algorithm problems where people think that bisexual is porn. So if I were to
Oh.
hashtag something bisexual, it will not be seen. And I've seen, if I were gay, I would have like 28 million followers by now doing what I do. But as a bisexual, it's like, I see it every time you hashtag something bisexual. It's quieting down. So how do you feel about the media and the role that they play in asexuality and renaming it and repackaging it? How do you feel about it?
I think it's interesting because, like, as I said, like, I feel like asexuality's been in a Groundhog Day for a long time. Like, I could literally find, like, black and white articles from, like, the 1960s and 70s that say, look at this new orientation, meet the asexuals, never before seen. And then you'll see that again in the 80s, and then you'll see it in the 90s. And then there's, like, things from the 2000s where they're asking asexual people the same questions I get of what is this new orientation? And now it's Gen Z are identifying as it. Before it was the millennials. And it's like, it literally just goes in a cycle of it being reintroduced as a new thing every few years. So that's kind of why I'm always like, we're kind of stuck in the 101 because no one ever gets beyond like the shock value, too many letters, brand new term, clutching pearls, and then it just kind of dwindles off and goes in a cycle. So I feel like it is kind of annoying because it's almost like they kind of keep pressing reset and then like starting things again right when you're kind of starting to get somewhere. And it's like, if you wanted to discuss asexuality or gray sexuality, you could have like, interviewed some asexual people or looked at like what our experiences are or what issues we're facing. Instead, it's just like experts are concerned that young people aren't having enough sex. Oh, and by the way, here's a word we just heard of. And they connecting these two things together, experts that probably don't know anything about asexuality, because realistically most of them don't. And yeah, I just feel like it's like really not fruitful. And I feel like it's kind of like where our media is at right now. You might have noticed that I feel like, and it's not just this year, I think it's been the same for like a few years, where like liberal media doesn't want to go there. They don't want to talk about like anything like queer because they don't want to seem like overly woke or too obsessed. And then like right-wing media is like all over it like a rash and like won't stop talking about it. So then everything ends up being more negative. That's
Yep.
what I've noticed.
No, totally. I mean, this is bringing me on to my next question, actually. Because as I say, we sort of are doing the same things on different topics, but you have been doing this for years. And I've always thought it was remarkable how much you keep yourself out there and you keep different people talking about it. But how do you keep the media talking about asexuality and making it feel like there's something fresh that another publication hasn't already spoken to you about? Doing that over such a sustained amount of time?
I mean, it's hard because like I feel like the threshold is very low for what the media is willing to do. I know like I did a piece for a magazine like in like, I don't know, 2020. And I was like, oh, could I do another? And they're like, oh, but we did that before. And I'm like, that was like 5 years ago. Like guaranteed you mentioned something gay like more than once every 5 years. Like, why does this have to be like a once every 5 year thing? And they're like, oh, we'll just add an extra line to the article we already did. And I'm like, well, you could just do another one. So it is hard because lots of places, I don't know, I think there's still that kind of, I guess, bias about it where they don't really want to go there or they don't think that it's like worth talking about. So it kind of takes, I think for me, it's more about kind of showing people that it isn't like this thing that exists in a bubble. Like it does connect to like wider social issues and like wider phenomenons that are going on. Like I think that, you know, it's asexuality in terms of, not just not experiencing sexual attraction, but in terms of having the ability to say like, no, like I actually experience my sexuality differently and there's nothing wrong with that. And that might involve me not having sex. And that kind of connects to, I feel like, lots of issues about autonomy. And I guess you could kind of connect it to the whole, like, are young people having less sex thing, but it's not in like an inherently bad way. And I feel like it kind of adds a more positive thing of people are finding the power to say no to things more.
Mm.
So I felt like just kind of taking it from different angles instead of just like, I guess, the kind of basics that the media wants to do, but they don't always want to go beyond the basics nowadays.
No, I know you. What's for you? It's finding that intersection, right? Of how does asexuality relate to this in an organic way that's not going to feel forced, and trying to move it past. Did you hear about this new sexuality called asexuality that every few years? Just talk to me briefly, because I'm sure a lot of people will look at you, as maybe some people look at me and think, oh, well, they get all that because it's them. Oh, well, it's there. Of course they're going to get the article or whatever. But actually, no one sees like the amount of rejection and no's, and no one cares about this. Stop emailing me. Go away. That you get. So talk to me a little bit about the rejection, some of the hard hustling that goes behind getting some of these articles actually out.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of the thing that I think makes it kind of annoying when people are like, oh, but why her? Why is it always her? And I'm like, well, what are you doing? If you put the energy I did, then you'd be in the article too. Like, and sometimes, well, most of the time I'll put a hell of a lot of energy into it and I still won't be in the article. Like, I've had to do a thing where like I say to places like, I don't do group articles anymore, where they like speak to multiple asexual people at once, because regardless of how much work I've done or how known I am, to be honest, if there is a white asexual person next to me, I won't make the cut. It happens every time and it has happened for years. So at this point, I'm like, I'm either just interview me or I'm not doing it, because I'm not spending 2 hours doing an interview to not be in it. because it happens all the time. So, but I guess that's the thing with like, the internet or just the media or life in general is that people only see when it works out. They don't see like the 50 something emails or how close things got to happening. And I mean, it's like in what world would me as a black working class aromantic asexual woman be like the in demand like it's not realistic. Like everything I get is because I've put a hell of a lot of effort into even being in the spaces to be considered, because I guess, as you know, like there's an aspect to it. It's not meritocratic with most of these things. It does kind of come down to being on people's radars or being in the right rooms, and I'm not the right demographic to be in a lot of the queer spaces. Like they're kind of very white male dominated, so like most of the platforms and the magazines and the events, they're all organized and run by white guys mostly. And I'm not at the top of the guest list for these things. So it takes so much extra effort to even be in proximity, to even be like, hey, have you ever thought about this? Or maybe I could do a thing at Pride, or I could do these. Like, it's like you really have to force it because no one's instinctively thinking, let me get a black asexual girl to do the thing. Like, no one's thinking that.
Yeah, such a hard slog sometimes. I think people don't see it. And I've definitely had that criticism before of like, well, why don't you bring people along with you? And like, why don't you help other bisexuals? And I actually have tried over the years, and I found actually that makes the thing even less likely to get off the ground. For example, I once planned this whole photo shoot where it's going to be me, a load of other bi guys, and we're going to all have like one of the letters of bisexuality on us and then a statistic. And one by one, everyone dropped out. And it was like, oh, like, because, oh, actually, I don't want to be in the, now that you've offered it, actually, I don't want to be in the newspaper anymore because my grandma might see it and I'm not out and stuff like that. And so actually, I find on the times where I've really tried to collaborate with people, it's just not ended up working out. So it's like, you know what, I'm going to do this because I genuinely don't have time to pitch 50 people to get an article to then bring you along to then have you back out last minute. And then it's a tricky thing to do. And I think that people look at it and think, oh, well, you guys get everything and you're not spreading the wealth. And it's not coming from a bad place. It's just hard work.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's like I'm not. I mean, maybe optically, people might think, "Oh, she's in a position to spread it." It's like I'm struggling to get what I get, let alone handing it to somebody else. Like, you know how long it took me to get the thing, and then I still might get rejected and replaced at the last second by someone who put zero effort in. So no, I'm not in the position to hand out to anybody.
Tell me a little bit about how you keep yourself motivated, though, because I've certainly felt at times over the years of doing this, and I've been doing, I think it's about 10 years I've been doing this now. It'll be 10 years next year, articles after articles, podcasts, interviews, books, advice columns, everything. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, I'm tired of talking about this. And like, I've said everything there is to say. And then something ultimately for me happens to get me right back into it. But it can be hard because it's not only just your sexuality, it's also your interest, but it's also a little bit, career. How do you keep yourself motivated to keep talking about one topic?
I mean, it's definitely hard sometimes. I think especially like this year, where, as I'm sure you've probably noticed, I feel like things are just like particularly weird. Like ever since like the Trump administration came in, I feel like things have just been like really weird and people have been very scared to do anything. I feel like there's been like less events, less opportunities, less cover, like less of just everything, and like everybody is kind of collectively struggling. And it's kind of meant that like there's been kind of like longer down periods, and for me, my motivation kind of comes from, I guess, other people and like being able to kind of be out in the world. Like I know I look like I'm very chronically online, but a lot of my work is actually in person, and I like being able to kind of meet asexual people, and when people are like, oh, like what you did there was really helpful, or I really appreciated that, like that's kind of like my motivation of being able to kind of like connect to people on the ground. So when there's kind of like longer periods where like nothing's happening and you are just kind of by yourself, and it could be a period where it's just like only hate comments are coming in, and like there's no opportunities, there's no nice things, it's literally just the downside for like months. That can be very demotivating, but I'm always just kind of like, if I just sit here and do nothing, then I'm not going to get that perk again. I'm not going to get that encounter again. So you need to keep putting yourself out there. Otherwise, you're not going to have those people be in a space where they can kind of come up to you. So I think, yeah, for me, the motivation is just like trying to focus on that like if I stop, the good bits won't happen. Because realistically, no one else is putting in like the kind of effort that I'm doing. So like if I don't do things, things just won't happen realistically. So
Yeah.
I kind of feel like I have to keep doing it.
How do you feel about the environment we now find ourselves in? Because I would say it feels like something just blew up and was just sort of in the remnants of like the smoke screen. You're trying to figure out what's left in the sense of
Just
I think
scavenging.
LGBT got so big, and when it got big, there was a big backlash as well. So you've got that to contend with on sort of multiple continents. But it also got so big that then there was a lot of infighting. I still hear from, gay men now that are like, oh, I don't really feel part of the community. Like I'm gay, but I'm not involved in that pride stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this disconnect with sort of online and people that are maybe just exhausted. And I don't know, it feels like we're almost in the ruins of whatever was happening, that it sort of got too big and blew up. And it's really hard to know now, like, well, where do we pick up from? Like you said, like, do companies still want to do anything for Biovisibility Day this year? Or is that kind of like done? Do the media really care? Are we going to have to move and talk about something else? Actually, do people need a period of cooling off and we should just go off and do other things and come back to this in a few years? Like, how do you feel about the current climate and where we go next?
I mean, it's so unpredictable. I think that's the thing. Like, I feel like I guess almost most of my lifetime or most of my adult life has just been like one bizarre thing after another. Like, I feel like every time I watch the news, I'm like, okay, that too. Like, you can't even anticipate like what things are going to be like at the end of the year, let alone like in a few years time. And I feel like, yeah, this year I feel like I would almost, it feels almost like, I don't know, I don't remember the 2008 economic crash or whatever, but I feel like it's almost like it's almost like that. It feels like there is like a kind of crash out like happening universally. You're almost kind of like, I don't know, like the 2010s influencer boom, and then it kind of like dwindled out. Like I do wonder if we're just in, and it kept going, but it never picked up to what it was. So I do wonder if this is just the new phase. I feel like it's been like a multitude of things at once. Like I feel like, AI coming in and like killing off like journalism in many ways, not entirely, but in many ways made a big difference. Like the platforms that would usually be doing things literally don't have writers to do things anymore. I feel like then the companies like don't have the budgets to do the things they would be doing, and then the prize can't do the things they would be doing. And it's like a whole ecosystem that's kind of being impacted. And then of course we get a very poor government who I had hoped would be doing better than they are. And then everything just kind of like compounds where it's just like you're looking everywhere and you're like, wow, everything's a mess. But I'm also kind of like, again, like I feel like our politics has been, I mean, we had a whole prime minister that didn't last longer than a cabbage. So like you really don't know like what's gonna what's
Yeah.
gonna happen. So I feel like in that sense, I try to maintain some optimism because I'm like, for all we know, there's like, I mean, I just saw like earlier today, people were talking about how like Meta had pulled out a lot of its AI because like now people are like, oh, is that not as lucrative as we thought it was going to be? Is that not the next big thing? So I'm like, you really don't know like what's going to happen tomorrow. So I'm partially like, things could get better. We don't know.
Mm.
I mean, they might not, but they might.
But I think you have to have optimism, especially doing what we do. Talk to me a little bit about so what I found is when you are an activist or some sort of campaigner, especially for sexuality, you're expected to know everything. As in, like, okay, what's the answer to this? What's the answer to that? How do you deal with those moments where you're like, oh my God, I'm actually struggling with my sexuality myself today, or actually I'm really unsure what this means? And who do you turn to for advice? Because I would say I have my podcast, Bisexual Brunch, where we can go and sort of debate things out and be like, does this make sense? Does that not make sense? And obviously friends. Do you have any similar support group? And have you ever felt really like, oh my God, I'm like the face of this, and actually I'm struggling with part of it or whatever?
I think I have, but it's been less to do with me struggling with my asexuality and more me struggling with like the communal aspect of it. I do kind of have like, I mean, as you said, trying to arrange like that photo shoot, like I do have like kind of like a lone wolf approach because I feel like when there are too many cooks in the kitchen, sometimes it just takes longer to get things done. And sometimes it's like, it's just easier for me to just kind of do things myself. And, sometimes when I do have, again, even if you're in a room with 10 people and only one person's like, I don't like you, I don't like what you represent, it's like, okay, well, the other 9 people were nice, but that's still completely thrown me off. And now I don't feel comfortable in this room anymore. And I've had like things like that happen quite a lot where I'm like, I'm advocating for a community every single day. and I don't actually feel comfortable in it on an interpersonal level because like I've had like a lot of racism within the asexual community, like I've had a lot of stuff. And then that's kind of been something where I've gradually am coming to find like support around that. And like I have like a few asexual friends I could like talk to and kind of vent to that kind of get it. And yeah, I've been kind of gradually working on my like communal anxiety that I kind of ended up with for a while. But yeah, it is kind of hard because I feel like for me, I try to like somehow make my work as impersonal as possible while still being personal. Like I kind of try to see it as like it's like a role and I can kind of step out of the role in my personal life and do something else. But it does get confusing, I guess, when, as you said, it's your orientation, but it's your community. And then it's also your like, I don't know. I feel like the kind of personal professional line is very blurred in this.
Everything you're saying really resonates with me, and I've definitely had that issue with community on the bisexual side. Definitely have bisexual friends, but as I say, I've been to, other bisexual events that are on, and I felt there's an expectation of, well, you're in the papers talking about bisexuality, so you should be best friends with everyone here. And it's like, I don't know these people, and like, we don't actually gel on some stuff. I don't dislike them, but we're just not, like, we wouldn't hang out anyway. And I almost think that there's sort of an expectation that maybe comes from the gay community where it's like, well, they all know each other and they all have clubs and they're all happy and that, every gay knows every other gay and it's almost that. Whereas like bisexuals, I feel, and maybe for asexuals, I don't necessarily know any other bisexual people. I get that a lot. I'll get like bi people that will write to me and say, you're the only other bisexual man I've ever heard of. I don't know anyone in my personal life. And so that aspect of community, I think, sometimes can throw you off, particularly, I guess, because it's not just that we're doing this stuff now, but we're doing it in a interesting time period, right? Like if we were doing this in the 80s, we
Mhm.
would have to have people with us to go knock on doors and to protest and stuff. But now you only need really a phone and a Wi-Fi connection and off we go. So it's just a very interesting time to be doing it where it's like, well, you don't necessarily need to have all of the community with you. And to be honest, not all of them are that bothered about being in Metro this week. Like they're just trying to live their lives and they just wish that people would be nicer, but they're not necessarily like me, like emailing 50 journalists, like, listen, we got to talk about this. So it's a very interesting thing that I think is put on both of us. It's like, well, you need to be connected with the community, which doesn't always work. I wish it did. Like, I wish like I had like hundreds of bisexual friends and we were just, just dancing away every night, but that's just not the reality.
Yeah, and I feel like I guess similarly probably with the bisexual community where it's like it's splintered enough that you don't all know each other. But also if you were to like, I don't know, be in some bisexual chat or something and then go to a bisexual meetup in London, you probably would end up running into somebody who's like, I spoke to you here, or I was in that same chat, or I'm on that website too. And I think that's kind of where, like, for me, it kind of builds my paranoia a bit because if I'm on like an asexual forum for like British asexuals and some one person or a group of people there are like, oh, I don't like her. And then I go to like Pride and there's a group of asexuals there. I'm thinking statistically, it could be one of you guys. And sometimes it is. And then it's like, then you gotta have this paranoia where I'm like, our community's spaced out, but it's not big enough that there's a chance that you just like we could easily run into each other if we're in a space dedicated to that. So then I kind of have that paranoia where I'm like, which one of you was it? 'Cause I know it's one of you.
Interesting. Oh, that's so interesting. Actually, it kind of maybe brings me on to one of my questions here, which is, what is one piece of advice that you wish you'd been told before you started doing this?
I feel like I wish, I know I've been told that it's okay to just like disengage, although sometimes I feel like it isn't okay to disengage. And I feel like that's another one of those weird things where you're kind of, I think in activism, you're kind of expected to be like constantly reactionary and constantly like providing a hot take on every single freaking thing, like 3 times a day. Otherwise, you seem disengaged. But like, I feel like now I'm at a point where I'm like, if it's not absolutely necessary for me to talk about it, you will not be hearing from me. Whereas before, I kind of felt like, if someone would come to me and be like, talk about this, I'd be like, oh my God, okay. And then I feel like then the more you say, there's people that were kind of waiting in the wings going, okay, let's see what Yasmin says so we can jump on it today. And then I'm like, I thought I was meant to keep saying things. I thought that's what you wanted. So yeah, I kind of wish that someone had told me like, you actually have to say things if you don't want to. Like you can't just be like, actually, that's not my problem or
Yeah.
not today or I'm going to take a break or that. that's your battle. I don't need to be in the firing line for that one. Whereas before I really would just kind of always end up in the firing line because I felt like I had to be.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Let's move on to talking a little bit more about the media in general, because you got sort of the news websites and the podcasts covered, but what about TV shows and movies? How do they do on the asexual representation? What could they get better? Is there anything? Are there any good examples you see of asexuality?
I think it's difficult because what other people feel like is a good example and what I feel like is a good example are different. Because, like when I was younger, it's not like there haven't been TV shows that have had it. I mean, there was, I don't know, BoJack Horseman had it. There was like a long running character on Emmerdale who was asexual. There was, prior to the character that I wrote for Sex Education, there was another one. So there's been things, but then I guess for me personally, I don't relate to white teenage girls. So it's like these are, and I mean, there's character in Heartstopper, like there's lots, but they do tend to fall into the same demographic. So it's like, well, technically, I feel like they are good examples because it obviously resonates with a lot of people in the asexual community. Most of these things that resonate for me personally because I'm just not that demographic. So I feel like that's kind of like the one sort of limitation that I think we have two limitations. One, that most places have a very specific preference for the asexual representation that they have, and they will be usually white, under 18, and kind of bookish is the preference. And then also I feel like now we're kind of in an age where the media is more like nervous about going there, whether it's because they're seen as being too woke or because they don't want to get left-wing people upset because it wasn't perfect. Now things just kind of like allude to things and don't really say it entirely, which is, I think, easier to do if you have like a gay character, because if you have like a gay guy and he's holding hands with a guy, you could probably hazard a guess and say he likes guys. For an asexual character, if you're trying to be subtle and not say it, it doesn't really look like anything. You kind of have to be explicit, otherwise it's like, the character like standing by themselves is the asexual one. It's like, well, they might just be standing there, like, you don't know. Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like we're kind of in like a kind of weird space where
Try being
I don't know.
bisexual, where it's like, well, you're gonna have a threesome.
You're literally
Otherwise,
gonna have to have like one on each arm. Otherwise, we don't know what you're talking about.
the audience would understand otherwise. Oh god, it's so interesting, isn't it? I wanted to talk to you as well. I couldn't let you go without talking about fashion, because obviously you're a model and it's all about fashion. So talk to me about the role fashion has played in your activism and how clothes actually can be a way to bring about some social change.
Yeah, it's funny because like I didn't expect it to be part of the activism. I mean, I was modeling first, then started talking about the asexuality and kind of thought it would be a separate thing. It wasn't kind of until the media was like, the asexual lingerie model, and that was like always a headline, and they'd always be like, hey, I know we're talking to you about other things, but could you send us pictures of like lingerie selfies for us to put in the article or like photo shoots? And I'm like, yeah, and then before I know it, like that's what the whole thing was about. So yeah, I feel like it kind of ended up tying together in a way I hadn't personally expected, quite naively, I think, because I kind of assumed we were like beyond associating someone's sexual orientation with the way they look and thinking that you could only look a certain way or wear certain clothes depending on what your sexuality is. But having realized that, I feel like then it kind of did end up becoming a tool because one, I could kind of capitalize on the shock value of like, okay, like you want boobs, here's some boobs, but also let's talk about the law. So you could kind of like lead it into different directions. And then I also think that it kind of ended up being, I guess, a kind of like a bit of a social commentary on the expectations that we still have, like not just on asexual people, but on everybody, that you have to look a certain way if you're in a certain demographic or if you're in a particular group, which I feel like we just kind of need to like debunk in general. Like I still get like so much heat from people because they're like, if you're asexual, then why do you wear makeup? Or why are you wearing skinny jeans? Or why are you wearing like anything that's like flattering to you? Like you must be trying to attract someone. And I feel like that's such like a wider conversation that people still think like that. Um, so it kind of has been quite instrumental in highlighting another side to that conversation. I think especially as nowadays, weirdly enough, a lot of that comes from like TERFs to me. For some reason, like that's kind of like the main group that really don't like how I look while being asexual. And it kind of shows, I think, a hypocrisy in their supposed support of women because they say that that's the point. And I'm like, well, obviously, you still got a lot of internalized sexism going on there. So let's
It's
unpack
really
that.
interesting. And it's interesting from the media side as well, because I guess this is clumsy language, but it's almost like you and I are sort of oxymorons in their eyes,
Mhm.
and sort of oh, you're wearing lingerie, but talking about not being sexual, and people see lingerie as sexy. And at the same time, I think that maybe one of the reasons that I cut through was because it was like, I'm bisexual, but I'm dating a woman, and people being like, what? We've never heard of such a thing. What does she think about it? Does she
The
know?
shock value.
No, she doesn't know. She has no idea. So I don't know whether. I mean, I feel like we've done what we have done off our own backs and our own hard work. But I think that when it comes to the media, sometimes they like that sort of oxymoron. They like that sort of little bit of like, what? What? That doesn't make any sense to us, because for some reason it doesn't make any sense to them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like even I guess the headlines we were just talking about. Like they could have just said, "Hey, there's some people that experience sexual attraction on a rare occasion," or they could have said, "Guess what? Brand new sexual orientation. You won't believe it. We're all so concerned. Read here." Like you kind of need that to bait people in. So I feel like I don't know, you just kind of end up being the bait.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, if I'm gonna be the bait, I'll be the bait, but I'll only want to be the bait if you're actually including what I'm saying afterwards, not just bait for the sake of bait.
How much do not just you but other asexual people? How much are there people that see that as sort of a challenge? Like, oh well, I'll be the one to make you attracted. Is there a lot of that goes on, or are people actually quite respectful of okay, you just don't feel that way?
No, I feel like that is, I mean, I guess for me nowadays, not really, because I don't go into spaces that much where that would happen. Like, I'm not really like hanging out in like bars and stuff by myself, like for guys to kind of come over and try that. But I think that kind of on an interpersonal level, with just like other people, like things like corrective and people like saying, like, oh, well, we can fix that through this. Like, that is very much a thing that still happens because a lot of people they don't really believe asexuality is a real thing. They see it as a reflection of your views or of your, you must just be insecure or you haven't met the right person, like that your real sexuality is just waiting to be unlocked by the right thing. So yeah, I mean that is something people casually suggest and say.
And is there, because you're right, I feel like on the female side, there's always that worry and fear of corrective rape. On the male side, of male asexuality, I feel like there would, and I'm assuming here because I don't know, I feel like there would be you've just got low testosterone, here's some injections or here's some medication to just get your testosterone levels to where it needs to be. Is it experienced differently for men and women? And is there pressure put on the men to sort of like, well, you're a man. Like, what do you mean you're asexual?
I mean, the medicalization part is pretty universal. In fact, I think that happens to women more because we're more
Really?
likely to be in healthcare settings where they explicitly ask you what your sexuality is and how sexually active you are, whereas they don't really ask men that so much. So we kind of end up going down the conversion therapy rabbit hole more. But I also think that, like, statistically, like, one of the reasons why women are more likely to identify as asexual is because of the way male sexuality is perceived. Like, it's very much tied into your manliness.
Mm,
And so it's kind of like something that I feel like there's kind of like more stigma and acknowledging that for men because, I mean, for many a centuries, women were just supposed to lie back and think of England and not actually experience sexual attraction anyway. Like it was never like an important thing. So I feel like in that way, it is somewhat easier for women to identify as asexual because some people kind of think that you should be. Whereas for men, I think that there's more stigma to it. But then at the same time, weirdly, media representation is more skewed to men for like in terms of like TV shows and stuff, which I have always thought ties into just like who do you want to deliver the message in a way
mm.
that's more appealing and people will believe white men in their 30s, which is the usual age range for asexual guys on TV shows, over a younger girl or a black girl or an Asian girl or something. So I feel like that's kind of why it skews in media sense. But yeah, interpersonally, asexual men are less likely to be obvious about it for sure because of that.
Interesting. Right. Well, let's wrap up with a quick fire round
Okay.
just to end off with. So, one stereotype about asexual people that you'd like to banish forever.
Probably just that it's like that you have to be like really shy and like meek and like a wallflower. Like I don't understand that association. Like it has nothing to do with your personality and I definitely don't fit that description.
One book, film, or TV show that actually got asexuality right?
I would probably say Refusing Compulsory Sexuality by Sharonda J. Brown is a nonfiction book that I would recommend.
Fair enough. A role model who inspires you outside of activism.
I mean, I just have to go for my mom. My mom's pretty great. And about her, I wouldn't
Perfect.
be able to do all this stuff because she helps to financially sustain me when people don't want to book me.
Fair enough. One thing you do for self-care that always works.
I play a lot of Sims 4. I have a very chaotic Sims life going on there, so I just project all my chaotic energy into them so my real life stays peaceful.
Love that. And if you weren't doing modeling and activism, what would you be doing instead?
I feel like I'd be doing something academic. Like, I have a master's in crime science from UCL, so I feel like I would
Ooh.
probably be doing something more on the academic side than what I'm doing now.
Perfect. Right. That's the end of rapid fire. Just one question to wrap up, which is when you look ahead 10 years,
Oof.
where do you hope the conversation around asexuality will be? And what do you think the experience of asexual people will be?
I hope it's something that's just a lot more normalized. I hope that like medicalization isn't still an issue. I hope it's something that's in the curriculum. I hope that we're like a recognized orientation under like laws and equality acts. And I hope that it's just like not something that people have to like work out or worry about. I hope that it's just like oh, I'm asexual, cool. That's what it is. And everyone just gets it and accepts it. And you can just focus on all the other aspects of your life. That's my hope.
Yasmin, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a really great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.